Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Rippin' In. In this episode, we're done with all the life story bullshit and we're getting straight up into the footy. So we've got 4 season previews for you this week. The North Queensland Cowboys, the Manly Sea Eagles, the St. George Illawarra Dragons and the West Tigers. We go into things like can Tommy T and Kieran Foran stay healthy for the Manly Sea Eagles and help them get into the top 8 for 2021. And then we also discussed the recruiting of St. George Illawarra and West Tigers. Have who they've brought in made enough of a difference? It remains to be seen. Alright, let's get into it.
Yeah, the Cowboys. Hey, mate, fucking 14th on the ladder. I think last year, maybe with the COVID, maybe it is a little bit of teams getting a little bit closer together, but they weren't. There was a bit of a gap between the Bulldogs and the Broncos, and say the Cowboys. Up until the last few rounds of the season, they were at least mathematically a chance to make the finals. I don't think that even the most one-eyed Cowboys fan thought they had the chance. And that sort of comes with the territory of having key signings like Valentine Holmes to begin with. We know that he tried to make it into the NFL, he gave it a red-hot crack. So when he came back, a lot of people that had an understanding of that would know that he would probably struggle a little bit to start with. And also as well, one thing that can't really get looked past is that he hasn't really played fullback for an extended period of time. He was primarily a winger with the Sharkies. I think he got up 23 or 24 tries for the Sharkies in either their grand final year or the year following that. And then on the mantra of money that they're spending that isn't really getting any kind of return is, of course, Michael Morgan. And as I mentioned earlier in the intro, the Cowboys have always sort of been a close second or third team for me. And Michael Morgan was really supposed to be the guy after Jonathan Thurston retired. And even when Jonathan Thurston did his shoulder, famously kicked that conversion in Game 2 of Origin, Michael Morgan took that Cowboys team to the grand final pretty much by himself. Well, obviously with Taumalolo, of course, but we've spoken about it. You need a halfback in order to win those big games. And Michael Morgan, what people don't realize on TV is that he's a big boy. He's a big boy. He's about 95 to 100 kegs. And you look at him and you don't think he's that heavy because of how he moves. But then imagine trying to tackle that bloke. And, the fucking flick pass that he gave to Kyle Felt in the grand final just shows how much I'm not going to say untapped potential that he hasn't shown it, but just how much the Cowboys are missing with him just not being on the field. And then more to the point, when he has been on the field in the last year or so, he hasn't been confident in his body. He hasn't been confident in himself, and that's really been impacting the Cowboys. Obviously, they've got $1 million cap hit with Jason Taumalolo, but he's the type of guy you build your team around. And for the Cowboys, it's really just, looking back on this season, trying to see what went wrong outside of maybe those injuries or those key guys stepping up. And I think maybe something that could be said is if Michael Morgan isn't there, who is an established option that can actually carry that side going forward?
My fear is that Michael Morgan's done. I think whether it's, his body is done or what, but I just don't know if he's ever going to be the Michael Morgan that he once was. Some players just give out a little bit earlier than others, and you certainly couldn't be upset with the career that he had to date, taking that team to the grand final that didn't end up winning, but of course winning the grand final and being a huge part of that, playing for the Maroons. I'm not sure if he's ever played for Australia, but certainly a career to be proud of regardless. But I definitely fear that if he's what the Cowboys are really pegging their success on the back of this year, it's a very precarious pegging. My major thing with the Cowboys last year and going into this year is that I don't think they were as bad as the 14th place finish sort of made them out. So many injuries, a lot of uncertainty around their coach a little bit as well. Valentine Holmes, did not have the value for money that he was expected. But then you got to realize that, they had some genuine superstars Breakout, the Hammer. Kyle Felt nearly jacked the top try scorer in the NRL from the 14th position. and Tamalolo was always an absolute beast when he was on the field. So certainly not as bad as it seemed. I think they've got rid of some of the dead weight. I think I've used that term for pretty much every team now. But I don't think that Jake Clifford was living up to what they'd hoped he would be as a starting halfback. So they've moved him on, and then they've also lost John Asiata, Tom Opachik. So I'm not really too concerned about that. But of course, Gavin Cooper is a big loss because he was their remaining leader on the field. He's the last old head, especially if Michael Morgan can't get back to primary health. So that's a huge out. And then because of that, I don't think their fortunes are set to change. I think they're just not. They're going to lack the experience. They're going to lack the leadership. And more importantly, they just need to get their 1 to 17 sorted. Who is playing fullback? Who is their 5'8" and halfback? And I think the problem is they don't even know where the best position for 3 of their best players is. Is Drinkwater their 5'8" or their fullback? Is Tabu Ifedo going to play fullback or wing? And again, Michael Morgan, I've heard of him playing centre. So these are some of their big 3 and their biggest stars, and we don't even know where they fit into the team. And then John Asiata, again, was one of those people that just sort of floated around filling holes. So what you'd really like to see from the Cowboys this season is a little bit of consistency, settling the players into their roles and letting them grow into it, letting them prove themselves, particularly if they are having to blood and not a lot of new players and superstars of the future.
Yeah, it's tough for the Cowboys because recently their recruitment, I think on paper, hasn't looked bad. Like, recently Josh Maguire was a fantastic signing, great player, gives you exactly what you need for your forward pack. He was a good signing. But I look at a guy like Jordan McLean, who came over from the Melbourne Storm, was seen as, the guy to take over from, Matt Scott and James Tarmow. And since then, he just hasn't really lived up to not even the expectations, but also the contract that he's on as well. And I think especially with the salary cap, like, we're not really sure how that's going to be, if it's going to be increasing anytime soon, especially with COVID. I don't think it will. But then on top of that as well, like, every dollar that you can save or that you can spend elsewhere is good money. And I think with the Cowboys, at least since Jonathan Thurston has left, it's been really difficult for the Cowboys to have just a group of guys overperforming, if that makes sense. Like, it's like, what you're going to get out of Jason Tamalolo every single week, and it's going to be closer to 300 meters than it is, 200, let alone fucking 150. And then, like you said as well, like, it's just going to be really hard for them to move forward if they have the Michael Morgan debacle hanging over their head. Like, they lost Gavin Cooper. Like, he's one of the last old heads that was around for that grand final. Like, they've lost James Tarmow's gone from that team. Ray Thompson's, I think, playing Q Cup. Matt Scott has retired. Lachlan Coote doesn't play anymore. Kane Linnett doesn't play anymore. Antonio Winterstein has retired. Like, Kyle Felt's still there. So, yeah, you got Kyle Felt, you got Michael Morgan, you got Tamalolo, and you've got Cohen Hess. Like, and let's not even get started. If there's X factors, then Cohen Hess is a shit factor. He's just, like, the fact that he, like, even Wayne Bennett realized that he played him in Origin. He played him 20 minutes, and he was like, that was the shittest stint in Origin history I've ever fucking seen. Get off the field. He is just they come along every, honestly, they come along every 3 or 4 years, this exact type of player. Like, Cohen Hess, like, oh yeah, he kind of looks like Dave Taylor. Kind of plays like Dave Taylor did when he first came out. He's pretty big, but fuck, he can move quick. And then you pay the big boy money, and the big boy starts getting more pies, starts getting a few more beers into him. Who else? Oh, Tony Williams, exact same type of player, devastating, damaging second rower who could also play center. Give him a big contract. What happens? Teams figure out they can only do one thing: run. So what do defensives do? They get 3 people there to tackle him every single time, and they're all soft. So once they start getting hit, and I'm not going to say that I wouldn't do that. I would fucking hate to be 120 kilos and to just be targeted by 3 other 120 kilo men. But that's the reality for Cohen Hess. Honestly, he was supposed to be the next big thing. Like, he was going to be the Queensland second rower for the next 10, 15 years, and he just hasn't lived up to anything like that. And that's pretty much who the Cowboys are at this point, is guys that, like, early on in their career looked really, really good, and outside of Jason Taumalolo, just haven't lived up. I'm not saying they aren't good footy players, they just haven't lived up to the expectations that they had when Thurston was still around and he was guiding that team. And I don't know, here's a wild thought, one of the greatest halfbacks we've ever seen is pretty good at raising the expectation and the standard for every other player that's on the field with him. Since that massive hole has been left on the field, you've seen that the Cowboys have really struggled because, again, when Jonathan Thurston isn't there, Michael Morgan can't play second option anymore. He's got to be the first option. And then when, like, Michael Morgan's pass is fantastic. Like, the physical feat of making that flick pass to Kyle Felt in the grand final is unbelievable. Like, we could try doing that in the backyard now, and we could do it 100 times, and maybe one time we'd be able to do it, just practicing it. Not in a grand final, down 4 points with 5 seconds to go. But that doesn't happen without Jonathan Thurston, that same play, bouncing off a tackle from Adam Blair, spinning back to the right, and then hurling a pass all the way over. And the reason why Michael Morgan was in single coverage was because at the end of the game, they're looking for Jonathan Thurston to have the ball in his hands, and then he makes the right decision. But now, it's Michael Morgan, or it's Valentine Holmes, or it's Jason Taumalolo. And Jason Taumalolo is a lock. Jason Taumalolo can't be expected to win them games at the end of the game, because what's he going to do? I've seen him do it a few times before and just run through people like a bowling ball. But you can't expect him to do that every single week. And he hasn't been able to stay healthy the last couple of seasons. And it's probably because he has to run 250 meters a game.
Well, that's the quintessential difference between the half and the 5'8", right? Is that the half is supposed to, be a little bit more of the leader and the game manager and pushing the footy all over the park. And the 5'8" is supposed to be that, second receiver, can play a little bit more like a roaming lock or like hit a line or string a pass through to a center or a winger. They've got a very much a supporting role that can be a lot more ad-lib. And so when you put a 5'8" into a halfback role, or you've got a weak 5'8" halfback and the 5'8" needs to play like a halfback, those players just don't succeed. And maybe that's the problem with some of these other teams, even with a Milford maybe, I don't know. But there's certainly some players that just don't thrive with that kind of responsibility on their shoulders. And on Cohen Hess, the bloke just looks fucking scared. He honestly looks scared out there, and I don't know why, because he is a monster and can play like a monster too. But I've seen him just melt in tackles, and I was just so surprised when I saw him picked in the Queensland team when you had some much better options, I thought, for second rowers for Queensland. But that's neither here nor there. So I don't know. I've been negative Nelly all night long. So here's two X factors that I think have some really big positives for the Cowboys. So Scott Drinkwater, I really rate this dude super high, and I feel sorry for him because he was actually squeezed out of the Storm due to the discoveries of players like Hughes and Pappenhausen and so on. Imagine him in that system. Imagine him in the Bellamy system. He could already be a great player, one of the best. At the Cowboys, he's definitely shown some flashes of that brilliance, but he's also had some really bad errors and poor decision-making. And some of that, in fact, most of that, I think is due to him, just too much being put on his shoulders and trying to do too much, trying too hard. So I'd love to see him as the first choice 5'8" for the entirety of this season, no matter what happens, and see if he can actually grow into the role. He does have a great running game, a decent ball-playing game, and he's kicking as it is. So give the bloke a proper shot, and I think they'll do better than flicking him around between half, 5'8", fullback, who knows. So I think he's going to be a major key to their success this season, and then of course their new coach, because by all accounts the dude just fucking gets it. Very professional, great strategic mind, and well liked within every playing group he's been a part of. I know that the Warriors were absolutely shattered that they couldn't sign him up long term. But at the end of the day, Todd Payton needed to be back here in Australia for family reasons, I believe. And I think most people would just prefer to live in Australia full time, just TBH. So, yeah, I think he's going to be a really big part of their potential success this year. So, good luck to him. I hope that he can get the best out of them. But for me, I predict that they won't sort out many of those things. I don't think they're going to get their 1-17 right in their best positions. So maybe I see them moving up to 13th, but maybe as high as 10th. I don't know. They just definitely won't be contending for the premiership this season. So, look, I've loved them since I was 5 years old. They were my very first team before I was introduced to the Raiders. So I do hope I'm wrong. I've always going to have a soft spot for the Cowboys.
Yeah, I think for me, I think the Cowboys, they like having big second rowers on the edge. And I did like, from limited games that I saw last year, I really did like what I saw out of Mitchell Dunn and Tom Gilbert. Like, they're both, like, you know, kind of in that same mold of, like, young, big second rowers that can, like, hit the line pretty well but also tackle hard. I'd like to see either of those two maybe take that next step. And, like, once a halfback has himself an option like that, it makes everything so much easier because, like, one of the underrated aspects of the Melbourne Storm system is having a guy like Felice Kafusi who doesn't necessarily like have to play like a kick out and have to make a break every single time or like score these like unbelievable tries, but it's just always about like making sure the defense has to be honest to that like hard ball runner just off the shoulder of the half. And then also on the flip side in defense, like it's always been Morgan's shoulder that's been giving him the issue. If one of these two guys can really step up and be to Jonathan Thurston what Gavin Cooper was for Michael Morgan. Like, nobody ever fucked around with Jonathan Thurston when Gavin Cooper was on the field. Because if they did, he'd belt him. He'd absolutely belt him. Same with Matt Scott. And like, so you need to have like those two guys like step and also help Taumalolo out. I expect to see Valentine Holmes with another like preseason with a season of NRL to get that fitness and the reps into the system there to keep on progressing. But again, I think it's hard to really say how the Cowboys are going to go with all these injury clouds sort of like hanging above them. So I'm probably going to tip them for a 13th on the ladder this season. Unlucky or lucky 13th for them, but hopefully it comes with, you know, some kind of blueprint for the future.
Okay, the 12th place finisher from... No. 13th place finisher. Classic. From the 2020 season. The Manly Sea Eagles. Honestly, probably the biggest disappointment of 2021. Honestly, bigger than the Broncos. A bigger disappointment than the Broncos. Because I know that they lost their best player in Turbo Tom, who I personally regard as one of the top 5 players in the game when healthy. But this is a team that still had Daly Cherry Evans, Adam Fanua-Blake, Marty DePau, Jake Jaboyevich, and furthermore, a bunch of first graders that had just proven themselves, like Kashevsky, Sirinen, Ruben Garrick, Cade Cust, and the list keeps going. Like, this is not a roster that anybody foresaw playing like shit. And yet, they played like shit. They didn't consistently get it right. And I don't think they strung together a full 80 minutes of football at all during the season. So I guess that's what they're going to be trying to do better in 2021. But I'm just not sure if their current roster, and particularly the people they've brought in to replace who's gone out, is going to get the job done.
I agree with you that they were pretty disappointing last season. I think it was probably the best season for them to be that way because a lot of the attention was on the Broncos. But yeah, it was really surprising and shocking to me because to be honest with you, I'm shit scared of Manly. They put more fear into me than any other footy club because primarily up until last season, there's never been any quit in them. And those teams that they had that, at least from what we can say, were staying under the cap when that Melbourne team was well and truly over the cap. If it wasn't for that Manly team, the Melbourne Storm were probably ripping off 5 premierships in in that span between 2007 and like 2012. They are a team that just, for whatever reason, I don't know how or why, like there's just something about the Manly Sea Eagles that they just simply refuse. Like you might beat them, but they're gonna hit you. They're gonna hit you hard, and they're gonna make you work for it. Last year, none of that really happened, and it was weird to me because Desi's still there. He's, you know, at this point, if he's not, bless you, sir. We'll cut that out. Yeah, with Desi there, like if he's not a cult hero at this point, he's some form of messiah in the Manly Beach area. And it's just like like you said, I agree with Tommy Turbo. Like I think in terms of like what he does when he's on the footy field, like how many questions he asks the defense. With him in the team versus him out of the team is night and day difference. But like you said, any team that wants to be successful has to be better than their number one option. And Manly just weren't that last season. Like, I think Cherry Evans cops a bit of flack. Like, he's never really been that guy to really kind of like push his team over the edge. Like he did a pretty good job in Origin this past season. But again, Cameron Munster was definitely public enemy number one of the New South Wales defense. But I wouldn't be surprised if Manly finished top 4 this season. Like I really wouldn't. Like I think that they're that type of team where if like Desi has a way to just get his players firing, and this is a big if, but if Tommy Turbo can stay healthy, he could score 15 tries in a season easy. And that Manly team, like we spoke about it with the Bulldogs, like yeah, like they had a fair few people a fair few people leave the club this year, but as long as you have guys in the outside backs that just do their job, they tackle hard, they run hard, and they take their opportunities when they have them. When Tommy Turbo is the guy that you're receiving the pass from, those opportunities are going to come more often than not. And going into the ends that they've had, like the big key one for me is Kieran Foran. Because, again, we can, if buts and fucking maybes, right? Kieran Foran's career has been completely devastated with injuries. Was he ever a game-changing half? No. He left Manly because they had salary cap dramas. He was getting offered a lot of money elsewhere. They said to him, look, we're not going to be able to pay you this type of money. Like, I'd take the money. Where does he go? He goes to the Warriors first. Fair bit of coin. I think he had 2 or 3 seasons straight where he just got injured and he didn't finish the season. Then he comes to the Bulldogs. Pretty much the same thing. But when he was playing this year, the one thing that Kieran Foran has always had and will always have is fucking dig. He's got dig and determination. You put him next to Daly Cherry Evans. One thing that Cherry Evans has always lacked is fucking dig and determination. The last time those two kids were like, and they were kids at this time, they were both rookies, they won a premiership. And they were a premiership threat every year that they were a halves partnership together. Now that's a lot. That was a long time ago. There's no more fucking Chock Watmow. There's no more Glenn Stewart. There's no more Brett Stewart. There's no more Wolfman. There's no more Jamie Lyon. There's no more Steve Maddai. And the thing that annoys me is that I hated Manly so much in these years, but their teams were so fucking good. And I only had free to wear, so I could only watch Channel 9. And Manly were pretty much playing every fucking week, particularly Sunday Arvo. Sunday Arvo footy to me is a God-giving blessing. It is a blessing. And every fucking week, it was Manly. Every week. That's why I knew their roster from 1 all the way through to fucking 17. But there's nothing that tells me that Jason Saab can't become the next Steve Maddai. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing telling me that fucking Tommy Turbo can't be the next Brett Stewart. Like, the only thing there for that team is that they just need to stay healthy and just make sure that when they get into these games where there's a bit of an arm wrestle and there's that 5 to 10 minutes where the game can go either side, that either Cherry Evans needs to put his hand up and say, yeah, boys, I'm going to take control of this game, or Kieran Foran can prove that he's still got it. And that's the only reason why they brought Foran over there, I think, is because they know, or Desi knows, that Cherry Evans needs somebody there just to help him steer the ship a little bit. And nothing against Lachlan Croker, but that ain't it, Chief. Like, he was not the guy for them last year. Like, he had a golden opportunity to prove that he was the guy that could be the 5'8" moving forward, and he didn't show anything for me. So I think, like, and again, this is the biggest if. If Tom Turbo stays healthy. If Jason Saab can, like, you know, iron out a consistent spot in the centers or on the wing. If Kieran Foran can stay healthy, and if they can replace Fanua Blake, this is a top 4 team, to me.
Oh, that does seem crazy to me, to be honest with you. I just can't see them in the top 4, let alone the top 8, just because of how good, like, those other teams are, number one. You know, and they've got it sorted all across the park. They're, like, all the other teams in the top 4, maybe even top 6, they have got some consistency over seasons. You know, they're so hot for every position. I'll be biased here, and I'll talk about the Raiders for this season. Holy shit! At every position on the field, we've got options, and good ones. I'm so fucking excited, and I don't think that Manly Sea Eagles have that. You know, we're looking at the people that have left: Joel Thompson, Corey Waddell, Adam Fanua Blake, Albert Hopewade. They've all gone to different clubs, including, you know, St. Helens in the Super League. But then they also let go, like, just totally released Brendan Elliott, Danny Levi, and replaced them with Andrew Davey, Kieran Foran, Josh Aloiai. Like, these aren't like-for-like replacements. So I think that the roster for me appears weaker. And yeah, like, my problem with them last year, like, I agree with you when you say that they are always in every game. They are, like, Manly Sea Eagles are always in a dogfight. Like, they ain't giving up. But they couldn't string the 80 minutes together that is required to win a game. And these players, I don't think, are improving, or this team isn't improving to the point that I think they could put together in 80 minutes, and a quality 80 minutes that could beat a top-tier team. The other problem is, I don't even think they've brought back Kieran Foran to partner him in the halves. To partner DC in the halves. I think he's playing number 9. What? He's playing number 9. I've been reading articles. They're saying he's training a hooker because they do want either Lachlan Croker or Cade Cuss to be their number 6. And I actually think both those guys are really, really good. I think the problem with your point about Lachlan Croker not seizing it, I think he was another victim of a chop and change scenario where there wasn't enough room in the roster for both Cust and Croker. So they had Cust at 6, Croker was 14, and then interchange them both in the game, so in a single game, and then week to week. So, you know, Croker would come in at a 6 for 1 week, maybe Cust would come off the bench, or play number 13. I think maybe even got dropped once or twice. And so I think there was that chop and change. So I would much rather see maybe Croker at 6, DCE at 7, Cust at 13, or maybe 12 if you're going to keep Jakey T at 13 just for that, you know, defensive roveability. And then, you know, the only option then is Kieran Foran at number 9 if you're going to play him at all. And maybe even their best option is to just not fucking play him at all because he's old. I haven't seen much of him in the last few seasons. That gives me any confidence. Yeah, Adam Fanua Blake, top tier prop. Alloy has been in those conversations in the past, but, you know, just think about the impact that these guys have had on their teams in the past. Alloy isn't Adam Fanua Blake. Really unfortunate for Manly that Adam Fanua Blake needed to restart his life somewhere else. You know, that for his own personal reasons, which you've got to respect. So all power to him. But, man, I don't know. I guess it just comes down to Turbo and DCE. When those guys have this crazy knack for playing the ball to one another, how many times do you see DCE make a break and hit Tommy on the inside, and vice versa? When Tommy T. Blake makes a break, Daly Cherry Evans is always there backing him up. It's probably one of the most dynamic duos in the league. So if Tom can stay healthy, they can reignite that partnership. But can he stay healthy? Or is he going to be another one of those players that had so much promise, but injuries just cut it short? So start Croker at 6, Cust at 13, bring Tommy back. Maybe they got it shot at number 4. In my opinion, nah.
And it's also as well, like you talk, the Tommy DC combination is so good as well. But also another thing that is like something that is almost like sort of like the hidden talent of a lot of the good teams is like, who do you have playing number 13 and how well does he play the ball? Because Jake Turbo is like one of, and like I'll say this now to the fans, like I'm a bit of an NRL fantasy buff. A few years ago I finished in the top 500. Thank you very much. And so I've always got to, like, whenever I'm watching a game of footy, like as like any of the fantasy sort of nerds do, is that you see a play happen, you're like, oh, that's, line break +4, tackle break +3, like, oh, tackle +1. Jake Turbo just gets to an absolute mammoth amount of work. But then he's also one of the guys that they're always talking to in the commentary box, because he has this ability where him and Tom have a fantastic little partnership where, like, they both kind of know where each other are on the field. And, like, there's been a few times where Jake has put off these little no-look, like, sort of inside balls to his brother, who's just gone screaming through the gap. And then Daly Cherry Evans, he might lack dig, but what he lacks in dig, he more than makes up for in support play. He is always there to get an inside ball to finish off a try. But what I will pose to you is, you remember in 2019, Canberra Raiders finished with 32 points on the ladder, and they finished in 4th place. Manly finished with 30 points and finished in 6th place. I was only 1 year removed from this schmozzle that was 2020. They're like, and that's the thing where it was like, and I truly believe that Tommy Turbo is that good. I'm not saying that it was an excuse for how they played last year, because you need guys that need to step up in those big moments. And I think that if they had somebody like a Benji Marshall, for example, if they had a guy like him that was like sort of like playing like off the bench, and then he was in that team, he might have been able to help steady that ship a little more. But the Manly team outside of that, they're pretty, not necessarily young, but they're inexperienced, so it's very hard. And like, my thing from a Manly perspective, you have a guy like Tommy Turbo who literally just makes your life so easy on the footy field. Like, we've all played footy with guys where like they're just so good, where like you almost like you take for granted like how good they are, because it's just like you just know they're gonna do something, right? Like, oh, I don't have to worry about like, chasing this kick down, because I know that like, if I don't, he's got it. That's Tommy Turbo. Like, oh, I'm not going to really worry about, like getting back early, because I know that Tommy Turbo is going to make 20 meters. And that's the thing, right? It's those little things. Like, Tommy Turbo makes 20 meters off of a kick return, and then that's 10 meters that his forwards have to worry about like tracking back less. And you do that over like 6-7 plays of like 6-7 sets consecutively, and Tommy Turbo saves his forwards an extra 150-200 meters of like just running, just sprinting back and forth, just with how good he is with the footy. And with Tommy Turbo, you're scoring more tries. When you're scoring more tries, there's more stoppages in play, and you're getting more rest. And I think he is that good. He's that good that Manly can turn this around. And I think, looking at all the teams that finished in the bottom 8 last year, they're the ones that had the biggest, like, if you're looking at points, or so, points that they scored versus points that they're expected, I think Manly had the biggest gap in that.
Look, I don't disagree with you on Tommy Turbo. Honestly, I was underselling it before when I said I think he's one of the top 5 players. I think he's better than James Tedesco, and I know nobody's going to agree with me on that. But I think when he's playing, he's better. He's better defensively. He's a better ball player. He's just, he's in a worse team than the Roosters. So, James Tedesco is always going to have the benefit of how good he looks in the Roosters lineup. And I think that Tommy Turbo is actually the opposite. He makes the Manly Sea Eagles look better than what they are. So I totally agree with you that he is an absolute game changer. Is one man enough to change a game, to change an entire season for a team? Jason Taumalolo wasn't for the Cowboys. Who else? There's so many teams that weren't one guy. Kalen Ponga wasn't enough to change it for the Newcastle Knights. So I don't think that Tommy Turbo can do everything. And just for me, again, with ruling them out of the top 6, even the top 8, like, are Manly better than Melbourne, or the Rabbits, or the Raiders, or the Eels, or the Roosters, or the Panthers? There's your top 6 right there. So, best case scenario, 7th. But I do have them as 12th for me, as high as 7th, but I think 12th.
You make compelling points. You really do, particularly with the top 6. And on paper, all those top teams are Manly better than those teams. Fuck no. No, absolutely not. The gap, and I said that there's a gap between, the bottom 5 and and the contenders. And there's even a bigger gap there between that top 6, and like it showed last year where none of those, like, if it wasn't any of those 6 teams, they didn't have a bee's dick in hell of like any chance of getting anywhere near the top because they were just constructed so well. But one thing that I will say about those 6 teams is 1 word, 3 syllables: injuries. The reason why Manly weren't there last year is because of injuries. And yeah, it might have been to like one guy. That's fair. But with all of these teams, let's just it's like it's silly. But like you pick any of those teams, like you pick one player, like their best player, and you take him out of the lineup, they're going to struggle. Like I'll say right now, the Canberra Raiders without Jack White in 5'8", that team has to play completely differently, right? Like the Melbourne Storm, like if you lose, like the Storm probably the ones where they're the most well equipped because they're the Melbourne fucking Storm. But you take Lil Puppy out of that system, they're going to struggle. The Parramatta Eels, like they're the ones like they're like we'll get to them, but they're like they always start way up here, like to the fucking ceiling, and then they always like crash to the floor. With Manly, like I've got them in at 6th because I think that in every year there's always 1 or 2 teams that overperform and there's always 1 or 2 teams that underperform. And I think that we'll move, like when we get through the teams like further on into the preseason, I'll give you my thoughts. But I think there's at least 1 or 2 teams in that top 6 from last year that I think are going to struggle to repeat, and I think are going to struggle with injuries because it's bound to happen. And with Manly, I just see that where they were last year, I think that was a blip on the radar. I don't think that is who Manly are. Like, I hate Manly. I really do hate Manly as a club. I've consistently hated their players, but I think most of that comes from just them being really good at footy. And I think like you go, who are they better than in the top 6? Well, I look at all those teams who are in the bottom, and like they just looked out of place down there last year. Like they're better than the Broncos, they're better than the Bulldogs, they're better than the Cowboys, they're better than the Tigers, they're better than the Sharks, and they're definitely better than the Warriors. And it's a toss-up between the Titans and the Knights. Like I sit them firmly in that, like better, not as good as the top, but definitely better than the rest. Like they're well and truly there, and that 6th spot, I think by the end of the season, I think that could have been me underselling them. I think they have it in them.
So next up in our season previews is the St. George Illawarra Dragons, who came in 12th position last season. So what did you reckon, Spencer?
Yeah, it was an interesting season for the Dragons. I guess I can't sort of go anywhere without sort of bringing up the fact that having a guy like Ben Hunt on close to $1 million a season, I think he's really struggled with his confidence. I think ever since the grand final in 2015, he has done so. And 2020 wasn't really any different. He did have a strong Origin series, but the Maroons failed to win. And he was playing hooker there as well. And he was sort of chopped and changed around throughout the year. He played a little bit of half. Like I think he's a natural halfback. I think he's played his best footy there. But he was put around into hooker a lot with Mary, who has since left. But yeah, I don't know. It was a tough season for the Dragons because I don't think they failed to win any game bar one against a side above them on the ladder, and that was against the Sharkies in round 3. And just every single week where it looked like they might have got off to a strong start, they just turned off for 20 or 30 minutes during the game. And they did the same thing as well, where they'd get out to a pretty good lead. They'd start really poorly and then come back strong in the second half, but it just wasn't enough. And you have the Haas partnership of Ben Hunt and Corey Norman just doesn't really do it for me. Like they're 2 guys that they paid big money for from the Broncos and Eels respectively. And since they've come to the Dragons, the expectations that they've had, they've just fallen well short of.
Yeah, I think they've definitely been underperforming for a couple of seasons now, and it just points to something being wrong in their organisation. I think it's the biggest indictment of a footy team when you lose your 2 rep players. So Tyson Frizzell's moved on, and then now it's just come out that Cam McInnes is moving on. So when your captain bails on his team, what does that say about his belief in the team and their ability to win a competition or make an 8 anytime soon? So there's something wrong at the very core there. And for me, when I stop and think about it, particularly with last season, it boils down to potentially 2 things. So Mary McGregor I don't think he was the right coach for that team. I think he's probably a bit too matey, and that was probably the biggest pro thing that you heard from the players or anybody talking about Mary McGregor as a coach of the Dragons. It was that he's very well liked among the group, and maybe even that's why Cam McInnes has moved on, it's been said. But there's such a thing as being too matey, and I think there were so many opportunities during that season where they were underperforming, where there still wasn't enough changes being made, and they weren't fielding their best 17. I think the most changes you saw in that team were in the wings, and maybe a few little chops and changes in the forwards. But, like, are the wingers and the forwards really your problem? Not really. And that brings me to my second, potentially even bigger reason why this team's underperforming, and that's, of course, the halves. Look, Ben Hunt has not been the same player since the 2015 Grand Final, in my opinion. He lost some confidence. He's a good player without being a great player. Good defensively, which is why he continues to get picked when there is needed to be like a utility for the Queensland Maroons, is because he can come on and defend. He can play a bit of hooker, halfback, wherever. But I don't think he's a top-tier halfback. But probably even worse than Ben Hunt being their halfback is Corey Norman as their 5'8". And I used to love this guy. I honestly used to think he got a bit of a bad rap. But then, you know, you can only go with the trend of behaviour here, and that is that he pretty much is in some kind of off-field strife annually, number one. And it's just like this poor attitude and laziness on the field. Like, he never takes the game by the scruff of the neck when his team needs him or they need to dig deep. He's not going to pull off that play. Or even not just a play, but just like leading his team like a Jonathan Thurston would into victory. Just doesn't do it. So the fact that that's who they're going to continue to potentially build their team around is probably the biggest problem. And if they don't sort that this season, then I see much of the same.
Yeah, those are all pretty good points. Yeah, it is interesting when you watch the Dragons. Just like you said, maybe it is because of Mary McGregor. And maybe, you know, is Anthony Griffin, I think, is he signed on? Is he yeah. Yeah, like you can't, I mean, with any NRL team, you can't say that they don't have talent, but I think the Dragons in particular, you look at how Corey Norman was in that Parramatta Eel system, and even how much potential he had with the Broncos. So there's definitely talent there. There's definitely talent with Ben Hunt. We know that. Like, they've got guys like Matt Duffy, Zach Lomax. They had Ewan Aitken. You know, these guys physically were, you know, pretty good players, like pretty like outstanding above the mean. But yeah, for so many years, they just weren't able to squeeze the most out of that side as they could. I think there might have been one season, I had to go back like maybe 3 or 4 years here, where I think 2 years in a row they started something like 10-0 or 10-1 or something like that. They're absolutely flying, and then towards the end of the season, like, they were either just squeaking into the 8 or just not even making the finals completely. And I think that sort of sums up the Dragons as a whole, is that when the going's good or they're going up against a team that they outmatch, they look like a really good footy team. But as soon as there's a little bit of adversity, and as soon as there's a team that's just a little bit better coached, and maybe the players just wanted a little bit more, they just can't really seem to get it over. And yeah, their player retention issues at the moment, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, losing Cam McInnes, who apparently, according to some reports, like, the first question the Sharks asked him is, "Are you keen to play lock?" And he said, "I'll play fucking anywhere." So if you're the Dragons, like, I just don't see how you lose a guy like Cam McInnes and then you're going to captain him for this season. Just seems a little bit odd. And then obviously Tyson Frizell, don't rate him as a club footy player. I think he plays a lot better at Origin level, but maybe that's the issue. Maybe it's because of who he was playing for, and maybe that's why he wanted to get out of the Dragons, because he knew that for his own career and for his own sake, he needed somewhere new, somewhere different. And the leash that Mary got was unbelievable. It's been like 4 years in a row now, before this season, where he was constantly being ummed and ahed as he's going to be the next coach to fail. And finally, this was the year. So I've picked them that this is going to be a rebuild. I think they're going to be in it for the long haul, and I think this season is going to be them just trying to offload as much dead cap space as they can, which I think should probably start with Ben Hunt's nearly $1 million a season deal.
Yeah, and I think talking about Tyson Frizell, it just irks me so much when people still rate him as one of the top second rowers in the competition. I'm like, sure, if we're living in 2018 or before, maybe. But over the last 2 seasons, there have been some amazing second row talent pop up. I think, here's just a list off the top of my head. You got Madison at the Eels, you got Yo at the Panthers, you've got Kikau at the Panthers, you've got for Taylor Mariner the Bulldogs, Tohu Harris. Like there's such a huge list of top tier second rowers, and I don't think Frizzell's one of them. At the very least, yeah, as you say, his week in, week out performance doesn't rate him there, in my opinion. So I think that may even be a bit of a dud pickup for Newcastle. It's actually my pick for this year's dud signing to be Tyson Frizzell. I don't think he's going to be what they're paying him to be. So yeah, they've lost him, who was at least one of their Red players, and a few other really, really good ones as well. So Ewan Aitken, I thought, had a ripper of a season last year, and clearly didn't think this was the place for him going forward. I think he's moved on to a team with better upside, and he had to move countries and move overseas to do so. So they've lost him, and I don't see them bringing in much talent that replaces these players. Isn't one example Daniel Alvarez?
Yeah, so I think he's a solid signing, and we sort of talked about this last week about those guys that you're not really they're not sort of gonna pop out on the stat sheet or even like when you're watching the game, but like they're going to be one of the first blokes that the players sort of like talk about, like who helped you win this game. Daniel Alvarez, he had a pretty solid first stint with the Parramatta Eels, and he was a guy that could consistently get you around 100 metres and maybe 30 tackles. So for a prop, he's getting through a lot of work. But the issue with the Dragons is that at the moment, that's not really what they need. Like, that's, like, we spoke about it last week. It's sort of a similar signing to, I guess, John Asiata that the Broncos made. Like, it's a good signing on paper, yes, and he's probably going to fit into this, the very least, the 17, like maybe even the starting 13. But he's not anyone that's going to, he's not going to be winning Dally M like prop of the year. He's not going to be making any rep sides. Like, he's just a guy that I think that they've, because of the outs that they've had, particularly with Frizzell, they just need to bring another middle forward into the rotation. And it's like the amount of outs that they have, it doesn't really matter how many ins that they really have. So, you touched on Ewan Aitken that they've lost, obviously Tyson Frizzell as well. Let's not forget that they lost James Graham just around the COVID situation. He had to go back home to England. He went back to the Super League, won himself a Super League, and has since retired. So that's a massive hole because he is like... There was a guy that I wanted the Broncos to sign for years and years. It was James Graham because he was just it. And the thing is as well, as soon as he left that team, like the accountability on the field seemed to like drop another level because like we all know how crazy looking James Graham is. Like he famously did bite Billy Slater's ear in the grand final and copped himself 10 weeks for that. But the way that there's clips on YouTube of him swearing at his own players, swearing at referees, like he didn't let shit slide when he was on the field. Losing him is massive. And then on top of that, they've lost. So they released Tim Laffy and Tristan Saylor, both promising out. Also, Tristan Taylor, a great promising young back, has some off the field dramas. So I think they did that sort of for the PR. Like, not going to sort of touch on that. Like, that's just just bad news bears. Tim Laffy, was always good. But again, I think it was the same situation where I think it's easy to say, but a Tim Laffy in a Melbourne Storm system, a Sydney Roosters system, like he probably, even a Canberra Raiders system, like he has the framework, what you want out of a good outside back, in particularly centre, where big, fast, pretty long, agile, does have a bit of a pass on him. So he's a good player, but obviously the Dragons just had no need or desire for him. And then who else they've lost? Corbin Sims went back to the Super League. Again, another middle rotation guy out of the equation. And Jacob Host went to South. So again, these average, Corbin Sims and Jacob Host, average kind of middle rotation guys. They've obviously brought in Alvaro to try to help replace that. But then outside of like that, who they brought in Jack Bird. That's the only other name that I really know on that list of ins for them this year. And I don't want to get too much into the Broncos players, so I'll hand it over to you, Alex. But yeah, what's Jack Bird really going to offer the Dragons this season?
Well, yeah, I guess if you were asking me what are the X factors that can potentially help the Dragons get some success, it could be Jack Bird. And I say could because I honestly don't remember what it's like to watch this guy play fucking footy. It's been such a long time since he's had consistent football that I just don't remember. I don't really remember what he was like. I know that there's huge raps of him when they won the 2016 grand final at the Sharks. And then I just don't know. So, if he can stay healthy, maybe, but I just have to see it. So there's one big X factor. He's their marquee signing, if you want to call it that, if you can call it that. So I just don't know about Jack Bird. But on the other side of things, like it's Zach Lomax that is their X factor. But it's so hard to be a pivotal X factor when you're playing in the centres. Like the centres is becoming a more important player in the game, at least because like you've got to be the most solid defensive player in the team, really, because you're gonna be making one-on-one tackles. You need to be making split-second decisions that's either going to leave you like manning up or with an overlap on your wing. And there's nothing more embarrassing than when you rush out of a line or make a defensive decision and it's like a 3-on-1 on your winger. Like that's on you as a centre. But outside of those kind of defensive decisions and so on and so forth, like you're not the guy that's the creating the plays. You're not the guy that's making the meters up through the middle. And if you are, there's an even bigger problem in your team. So Zach Lomax had a fucking awesome season. But if he's going to be their X factor this season, then that I think just points to the detriment that the Dragons are going to run into this season.
That's it. I also picked Lomax as my X factor for all those reasons. And you make a good point. It's so easy to take a centre out of the game, and it's a very underrated defensive position where if you don't cover off your inside, and you let's say against the Panthers, right, you've got Kikau on your left or right shoulder. And then if you don't respect the outside, then you've got a guy like Crichton and To'o like on the outside as well. So for a centre, and once you start missing a few tackles, like you can take a guy out of the game. And really the last pure specialist centre that I've seen in terms of like he was a guy that teams had to focus on in defense, and then his team built him around in offense would have been Greg Inglis. But Greg Inglis could also play anywhere. So I think it was just more of the fact that in that Melbourne Storm system, they just had so many other great players that they could just shove GI into centre and he'd just do his job there. And it is I think it more sort of goes to show that the Dragon, the X factor that I want to be talking about is a Corey Norman or a Ben Hunt. You know what I mean? Like Ben Hunt's first, not his rookie season, but his first full season as a starter, he was absolutely phenomenal. He averaged something like 75 fantasy points a game because I had him in there from the start because he was like a cheap rookie. And he, I think, had nearly 30 try assists on the season. Like you think of Ben Hunt having nearly 30 try assists a season and leading a Broncos team to a grand final, literally with 79 minutes, with a minute to go on that 2015 grand final. Ben Hunt is probably the Australian half for the next 5 years. You would bet on that. And then since then, it's gone away. So, like I said, I think it's going to be a rebuild. I don't know how the Dragons are going to be able to get any better with obviously we're going through the ladder and the list. Manly are going to be better than them this year. I think the Bulldogs are going to be better than them this year. And I think the Cowboys and the Broncos are both going to be better than the Dragons. I've tipped the Dragons to be 15th this season. I've tipped them proper low.
Yeah. The more I think about it, the more that I probably would have had them in my last position spot. But I just honestly think that the Bulldogs, I think they're overhyped and believe in their own hype at the moment. I think with a couple of the additions that they've made, they're thinking that they're going to run through some teams. Or I'm just thinking, not yet, guys. So I've still got the Bulldogs as my absolute lowest team. But the Dragons are pretty close behind. So I've also got them in 15th. And it's going to be a while until they turn around. They've got to do better than this. They can't be losing this top-tier talent and then replace them with...
Exactly, yeah. Full clean-out needed, like right off the 2021 season and get ready for 2022, I think is at least a tip from us here for the St. George Illawarra Dragons. Alrighty, so the next team on our list is, of course, the 11th place finishers, West Tigers. So, Alex, what do you think of their season in 2020 and their prospects for 2021?
The Tigers are absolutely the best in the league at a very underwhelming middle-of-the-road season. It's the biggest gag in rugby league for the last few years, the 9th placed Tigers. This year they finished 11th, but what it's more referring to is the fact that they're just always not shit, but just not in there with a real shot, not in there with a chance. So many years they just are hoping on other teams' results in the last round or two to have some success. And even this year, I believe they were in the hunt, as many teams in the 8th to 12th or 13th position were until the final 2 rounds. And again, if you don't take your own season into your own 2 mitts, what chance do you have? So, look, the Tigers, it's dramas in that place. I don't know if it's organisation or playing group or something, but I think it's pretty evident when a former Tiger and now Panther, Matt Eisenhuth, came out this week and says, the standards that are expected of you at the Panthers are like nothing he ever experienced at the Tigers. Like, what's that saying about this team? Like, I'm just not feeling any better about the Tigers this season, particularly with how much talent and experience they've lost in this off-season. What do you think?
I've never really loved the Tigers. I watched the 2005 Grand Final with bated breath, hoping the Cowboys would get up over the Tigers, and they didn't. So since then, I kind of had a bit of a hatred towards them. And since that Grand Final in 2005, the Tigers have finished 9th on 5 separate occasions, which is pretty hilarious. So 1 in every 3 years, they're finishing perfectly in 9th place. And look, I like Michael Maguire as a coach, or not really as a coach. I like him as the type of coach that he is and what he sort of expects of his players. But I don't think he's as good of a coach as what people think he is. I just think, again, he inherited a very good South Sydney side, and he cops a lot of what's the word? A lot of praise. There you go, for putting Greg Inglis into fullback, but it wasn't any kind of masterstroke. It just simply came down to they had nobody left because all their fullbacks were injured. And they just thought, fuck it, we'll just chuck GI in there and see how it goes. Like, obviously, one of the immortals, like at least one of the best of our generation, is going to be pretty good regardless where you put him on the footy field. What you should be looking at from his sides with the Rabbitohs is how those teams capitulated. Like, after the fact, do you look at their team from the 2015 or the 2014 Grand Final, and after that, like, they had so many players just completely fall off the wagon, and a few guys came out and said they just didn't really like his style of coaching. And it just, again, goes to show you as well how good that roster was, because Anthony Seibold took him to a preliminary final, and he proved himself to not be a very good coach either. But getting back to the Tigers, I don't see too many blokes in their 1 to 17 outside of maybe, a winger, David Nofaluma, who scored himself a bag full of tries this year, but he's a winger. You can, he's on one side of the field, you can cut that one side of the field off. Like, remember when they had the next New South Wales halves partnership for the decade in Mitchell Moses and Luke Brooks? And what happened? Nothing, because, literally, careers go to die at the West Tigers. And, the chat from Eisenhuth just, sums it up completely, because I'm not super aware of geographical location, but I'm pretty sure the Panthers and the Tigers are both on the western side of Sydney, so they're pretty close rivals. So for him to go from one club to another pretty close and then go out and, talk a bit of smack, I think, go to show just what's going on at the Tigers. And, Josh Reynolds went there from the Bulldogs, rated him as a pretty good footy player, just went to shit. The way they handled Benji and the way they handled Robbie Farah, in their heydays of the late noughties to the early 2010s, just go to show everything you need to know. And the guys that they've signed, we'll bring them up in a second, I don't know are match winners.
They've just lost almost a full team, or a competitive team's worth of talent and leaders. It's probably the worst outs of the entire league. They have not brought in anywhere near enough players to make up for losses you've got the Chris's, so Chris Lawrence, who's been there for 20 years or something. Then you've got Chris McQueen. He was great for a time. They've let go, of course, Benji Marshall. We'll get into that one in just a second. Matt Eisenhuth, as we mentioned, Elijah Taylor, Josh Reynolds. So beyond those players they let go, they also had Harry Grant, that I think is also pretty evidentiary of what's going on at the Tigers, when he wanted no part of being going on with that loan deal. After the loan deal was finished, he wanted no part of staying with the Tigers. So all these players have moved on, and now they're going to have just Tamo, one of their only additions to this year, as the leading and only old head of the team. And what, they're already going to make him captain because he's the only choice.
Yeah, it was almost laughable that the Tigers fans thought they were keeping Harry Grant. Like, there's no amount of money in the NRL salary cap for one team that would have kept Harry Grant at the Tigers over the Storm. And it just goes to show, like, it was a very weird thing, like, loan deals in the NRL. Like, there haven't really been too many of them. But this one seemed to work out well, where the Tigers, like, the Storm had a deficit in outside backs. They had, what was his name? It was
Paul Momorowski?
That's the one, Mr. Alphabet. And the Tigers needed a hooker, and the Melbourne Storm knew that they needed to get Harry Grant, first grade reps, because not only did we have Cameron Smith, we also had Brandon Smith, the Chiefs, who was also looking at being the second choice hooker, and then they had Harry Grant as well. So the Storm did a fantastic job actually getting him out and showing why they are just a cut above the rest, where they won a premiership with what looks to be probably the next best hooker in the NRL, not even playing for them. And that's one thing that I've seen a lot of people, they've been talking up the Tigers. But you got to think, they had a guy like Harry Grant who literally showed as well, like in Origin, how good he can be. Against, like, with 34 of the best NRL players in the world on the field at one time, he came out and just broke that game open in the second half. He played fucking phenomenally, and he's not going to be out of the Queensland team bar injury, I think, for the next 5 years. And now he's gone. Like, there's nobody there that really makes me think, oh, well, look, like they did sign James Roberts. Fair enough. We've heard this a million times before with a million different players. He's training the house down. The house down. But he's done that before. And he's one of the few players that played better at the Gold Coast than he has anywhere else in his career, which is just astounding to me. Maybe there's something good that you can get at the Gold Coast that you can't get anywhere else. Fuck to find it, right? Went to the Broncos, had a great coach like Wayne Bennett underneath him, and he just couldn't put it together consistently. Moved to the Rabbits, again, back to Wayne Bennett. Everyone thought it was going to be, a career stroke for him, that he was going to finally rediscover his form. And then the same sort of things happened. He fell into, I think, probably alcohol, like probably drug issues as well. And now he's going to the West Tigers. That has been proven to show that if you want your career to go nowhere, that is where you go. And he is there, in quotations, like, strike X Factor edition. And other than him, it's what I think they're paying Joe Offer $600K or something like that.
And we already, of course, touched on our thoughts on Joe Offengowie in our Broncos episode. Good luck to him, but fuck, he needs to pick up those numbers. But overall, I think, with all these outs, there's so many stories that have come up over the off-season too, with all these outs from the Tigers. Elijah Taylor and his manager fleecing him of over $400,000. It's just crazy. And he copped a lot of flack for this too, because he was whinging, apparently according to some people, he was whinging about losing $400,000 when he's a high-paid rugby league player, and has been for quite a long time. I think Elijah Taylor's been around for at least 13 seasons, maybe a bit more. So people are like, oh, boo-hoo. But could you imagine losing what is the equivalent, $400,000, a full year of rugby league, where you've put your mind, spirit, most importantly, your body on the line? Rugby league is a huge sacrifice that I think so many people forget. They just think that it's an absolute cash cow. You get to play rugby league for a living. How good. It takes a massive toll, and you earn your money, I believe. And people were talking about how he shouldn't be that upset, but I don't know anybody that would not be upset losing a whole year's worth of salary. And this is a guy that he considered to be a father figure. So it must have been at least a little bit cathartic for him to see. I think it was a friend of his even that approached his manager, because his manager declared bankruptcy, so he's never going to see the $400,000 again. But the guy his friend approached the manager and just smacked the actual crap out of him. So at the very least, he got a little bit of comeuppance, but not $400,000 comeuppance. And then, of course, you've got the Benji Marshall situation, and it's just this is a guy who made tens of thousands of kids want to play rugby league. There's no denying that fact. He's been one of the most exciting players, and for a long time too. There's I'll use Sean Johnson as an example. There's a lot of hubbub about Sean Johnson, but nobody gives a fuck about Sean Johnson anymore because he never lived up to the hype. He couldn't be consistent. He hasn't produced amazing comeback wins and premierships and blah blah that Benji Marshall has done, and he deserved better to get punted. When he just wanted one last year with I think he was ready to take like $100,000 or something stupid, but he just wanted to still be there. And frankly, as far as the Tigers are concerned, who's taking his place? They've got two, like, putting square pegs into round holes in the form of Adam Dewey and Paul Momirovski, both of which have not played NRL at 5/8 in NRL. And they just let Benji Marshall walk. And he's now been picked up by the South Sydney Rabbitohs, who are, of course, a big chance of a top 4 finish this year. So it just points to, like, this team has no fucking idea about their best 17 and their recruiting strategy.
Yeah, I'll quickly touch on the Elijah Taylor bit. Like, anybody that wants to use the excuse of, oh, well, you know, like, who cares if he lost $400,000 because, like, he earned, like, a lot of money. Like, that's literally the same as somebody that earns $40,000 a year, over 10 years finds out that he's lost $40,000 from one of his mates stealing from him. You're telling me that you're just going to be like, oh, you know what, mate? Like, I've earned $400,000 over the last 10 years. Like, that 40 grand, I don't need to get that 40 grand back. That's fine. You're a fuckhead. Pull your head in. Like, anytime anyone steals money from you, that's not good. So don't try to do this bullshit if he's a footy player or Elijah Taylor boo-hoo. No, boo fucking who can't. That's $400K. It's 400 fucking K. But anyway, back onto the other topic of the Tigers and just the shit show that it is. Yeah, like, show some fucking loyalty. Like, one thing that I will say about the Broncos is that we gave Darius Boyd far longer of a leash than what the Tigers ever gave Benji Marshall, and it shits me to tears because Benji Marshall left the Broncos to go back to play for the Tigers, and he was playing really well at the Broncos. He was honestly one of the things that delayed our eventual demise and made us not realize how bad Milford was because he was doing so much of the heavy lifting playing halfback. He's a fantastic player, and the Rabbitohs have got themselves an absolute pearler of a player who's going to be able to fit in for depth, for injury, and we'll get into that with the Rabbitohs episode, but that is just a great signing, and it goes to show that he is still valued in the NRL. So why did they let him walk, right? And like you said, who have they got? Does Luke Brooks still play footy?
One of the most abysmal halves in the NRL. Like, of the one person that they've kept from that whole fallout at the Tigers a few years ago, they kept Luke Brooks. They're like, that's our guy. Like, what a joke. What a joke of a player. Just has nothing. No game management, no creative skill in my opinion, certainly no defense. So he's not the guy. And then their only other guy that has shown some glimpses of, greatness in the halves, Billy Walters. And then it just comes out this week that he's probably going to be walking the plank too. And when I say walking the plank, I mean going to play for Daddy at the Brisbane Broncos. And by God, I hope he takes Milford's spot.
Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! Yes, he is. Yes, yeah. I hope he will too. I hope that broken hand is a little bit more of a shattered hand and somebody can just run an 18-wheeler over that fucking hand of his. But yeah, let's not forget as well that they had both Moses and Luke Brooks, and they decided to pick Luke Brooks. They thought that he was the guy. And Mitchell Moses, since going to the Parramatta Eels, again, he's in for 1 week, out for 3 type of player. But fuck me dead, when he's on, he's a fucking good footy player. And the Parramatta Eels, before he tore or strained his calf muscle, were leading the league, and they were the front runners. And it took as soon as he was gone, that entire team just failed to pick up the pieces around him. And now Moses was supposed to be the 5/8. He's now playing halfback with the Eels, and his kicking game is pretty fucking good. Yeah, you can bully him a bit in defense, but if anybody, there's nobody that follows rugby league. I don't even think Luke Brooks' parents would do this. If you have the option between Mitchell Moses and Luke Brooks for the same amount of money, for more money, you're taking Mitchell Moses every time. And that just goes to show that when the Tigers have been presented with a, turn left or turn right or take the red pill or take the blue pill, they always just make the wrong decision. And how they move forward from this, I don't think they can. I think that, David Nofaluma, one of my X factors for the season, I think he'll continue to just do what he does, which last season was 17 tries in 20 games, something like, I think, 158 tackle breaks, 118 tackle breaks, 17 line breaks and 7 try assists. But again, he's a winger. And again, they're paying him good money because they had to pay him decent money to keep him around. And they're at least smart in the sense that they know that guys like Nofaluma can bring fans in because he scores tries, and tries means dollars and meat pies at the canteen. But then the second guy for me, which I can't even believe is even the X factor for them, is Moses Sumbai. He's played everywhere in the backsline. He's played fullback, he's played centre, he's played half, and he's played hooker. And he looked really promising in his early few years with the Bulldogs. But again, it seems to be this recurring theme that he moved to the Tigers and just nothing else has happened. Like just nothing else. It's like I think he made the Origin team purely because Queensland just had nobody else to play centre, and it just goes to show how poorly he played for Queensland, because this past season where the Maroons quite literally had nobody to play outside backs, they were like, not fucking Umbai. We have more than fucking Umbai. We'll pick Edric Lee. We'll pick Heimel fucking Hunt before we pick Moses Umbai. And that's nothing against him. Like, he's a great footy player, but I just think that he's in the completely wrong system. And with talks of other guys moving from teams to the Tigers, the final X factor for me, I think, is Offa Ngawi. I think if there's one guy that might be able to break this mold of like players' careers going to die at the Tigers, it is Joe, for the simple fact that you look at his stats from 2016 to 2017. 2016, he was only sort of just starting up. 2017 had his first full season in terms of like, being a starter, and he played pretty well. Something like 30-odd tackles a game, 100 or so meters, and he actually looked like he was going to become one of the leaders. So this is when he was still playing with Parker and Thaiday, so he wasn't the go-to guy, but when he was, the beta, he was a beta dog, he played really well. And then 2018, we were sort of thinking like, 2019, this is going to be like his sort of season to shine. And then Payne Haas came into the picture, and we realised very early on, just the eye test showed you, that Payne Haas is a much better player than Joe Offa. But that's fine, right? Like, you can still not be as talented as another guy, just as long as you sort of show that you like your worth, like that you belong to be there. Like Alex Glenn at the Broncos for so many years. Like Matt Gillette was 10 times a better footy player than Alex Glenn was, but Alex Glenn just always had a fucking go, and that's where Joe should have that's where he should have been like put into. But we've already gone over the immaturity issues of Payne Haas. Like, that's been absolutely ridiculed for the last week, and it was, when he got suspended for the first 4 games for arcing up somebody at a junior footy game. Matt Lodge, I don't think, is anybody that you really want to be a role model. And Patrick Carrigan is probably the only other guy at the Broncos that sort of showed anything, but he's way too young. So Joe kind of had to be that guy to sort of be the alpha, and that's just not who he is. Like, that's not the type of guy. He's not a vocal leader. He's not a, run up and like put a massive shot on and like sort of like get the team revved up. He's simply a guy that'll just roll up his socks and he'll just do his work. With James Tarmow being there at the Tigers now, I think that that's a perfect role for Offa, because now Offa can go off the back of Tarmow, and Tarmow can show him how to go and how to do things. And I think if that is the case and Tarmow stays healthy and he plays as well as we think he will, I think Offa can definitely resurrect his career. Probably not for the money that he's on, but I think he can definitely get back to that 100 or so meters a game and 30 tackles a game, which the Tigers are going to need to just even stay competitive in games, let alone win the fucking things.
Yeah, my only concern with that, potential option for Offa to become their X Factor is you need more than one leader in a team. And if his performance is based off Tarmow being the leader and taking that pressure off him, then who else is going to do it? There's just no one else in the Tigers team. You're right with Moses Mbai. He just went face first into his ceiling very early in his career. I remember watching him in that Game 3 Origin game last year, 2 years ago now. Just no speed, no strength. He's relinquished the captaincy. He's already kind of said, I can't lead from the front. I don't have either the leadership skills or just the flat out skills. So James Tarmow is the only guy that comes to mind. And in any good team, you need a couple of leaders. I was even just the other day, because I'm reading Jonathan Thurston's book at the moment, so I was watching the 2004 Grand Final. And the Bulldogs had Mark O'Mealy and Willie Mason, who just tore anyone and everyone to shreds. And when they led from the front, the others followed. You had Sonny Bill, who was the X-Factor forward. You had some guys coming in, like Tony Grimaldi and Hughes and a few of these other guys that were just middle-of-the-road players, but because these guys were showing them the way, they looked even better. And I think Tigers are going to need Offa to be that guy, and he's probably not going to be. He's shown that he's not that guy. So I definitely have James Tarmow as my X-Factor. I wish they'd bring back someone like Michael Cheekham. Michael Cheekham's a game breaker, man. He's single-handedly sunk the Broncos, I think, twice.
You shut your mouth.
He's just an amazing player, and I don't know if he's got some other stuff going on there. There's always this question mark over as someone with the talent of a Michael Cheekham. Why isn't he getting a run? Does he not train hard enough? Why? But he's not in the team, so it's all down to Tarmow for me. A lot of people don't really think about how much success he has clearly garnered and led teams into success. So at the Cowboys, he grew into such a well-rounded leader to the point where he was, of course, pivotal in their 2015 season and grand final win. And then he's now done the same thing as captain for the Panthers, taking them to the grand final last year with something like 17 games straight as wins. So hopefully he can bring that over to the Tigers now, but it's a huge ask. So for me, for the Tigers to fire, people have got to get behind him, but I just don't know if he can do it himself. So I don't know. What are your thoughts for their prospects this year?
I had them somewhere in the 8 to 12 mark until I read an article that said that both Joey Leilua and Lasani Leilua were training on the same side. And I thought to myself, none of those can tackle for dick, so they're coming last. They're coming last solely because teams are just going to put a 4-lane highway in between BJ and his brother Luciano, and it's just going to be a field day all year long. And when that doesn't work, they'll just run over to the side Jimmy the Jets on. Like, the Tigers might, like, when the Tigers are on, and they'll have a couple of games when they're going to be on, because, like, BJ Leilua, Nofaluma, Luciano Leilua, Jimmy the Jet, there's some points there. There are some fucking points in that team, but there's also a lot of points going back the other way, and they couldn't crack the top 8 with Harry Grant in the side. So, for me, they're finishing dead last.
Yeah, it's not looking ideal for the Tigers this season. At the end of the day, they're the biggest enigma of a team in the NRL. You just don't know what you're going to get from them week in, week out. You don't know if they're going to be competitive, or you don't know if they're going to get blasted off the park. I think last season they only beat one team in the top 8 or above them on the ladder, which was the Sharks. So I'm looking at this roster. I don't see much of an improvement. Maybe if Tamau, Offengawi, and the Jet do pay off, for sure. But I don't know. My question is, like, is there something about merger teams that just, like, complicates things in the back end? Like, if you think about the St. George Illawarra Dragons and the West Tigers, is there just too much going on in the background where, the Western Suburbs team and the Balmain team in the backgrounds that still both exist, are they just at loggerheads, and that's why it just creates this toxic culture or something? So, I don't know. These merger teams are just absolutely garbage. And so I've got the Tigers at 11th, but honestly, they could go as high as 8th. They could scrape into the 8, as they often try to do, or they could be dead last. They honestly could be dead last, except for the Bulldogs, who I think will actually be dead last.
Yeah, I think that they're going to be fucking real lucky to finish 11th. But yeah, I think it is an interesting point that you bring up with these merger teams where, yeah, for whatever reason, maybe it's because they've got too many things going on in the background, like, different owners, different, GMs or presidents of certain leagues, clubs, or whatever it is. Like, there definitely does seem to be an issue where, same thing we talked about with the Dragons, right? Like, it seemed like for a while that it takes them a long time to sort of get themselves up to scratch, and by the time they've actually sort of like started to build a team around them that they think is kind of like half decent, the framework has already been ripped out from underneath them. So yeah, look, like I wish we had something else nice to say about the Tigers, but at the end of the day, there's 8 teams that are going to make the 8 and 8 teams that aren't, and the Tigers for us is just going to be one of those teams. And outside of a few of the other teams we've spoken about, like for me, like I think the Tigers, out of all the teams that didn't make the final last year, probably have the least amount to look forward to moving forward, because at least with the Dragons, you can say that, they've got, Zach Lomax, and, they do have a new coach. So there is potential for there to be a relatively short turnaround. But with the Tigers, yeah, like everybody that you've brought in, like you can't tell me that you're excited about Jimmy the Jet or Joe Offengawi or anything like that. Like it's, yeah. But yeah, that's it. Like team 11 will either be 11th by Alex's mark or 16th by Spencer's. So that's it. That's the Tigers for you for 2021.
All right, that's the end of our episode for this week. Thanks as always for listening. If you're here with us, you have a really serious rugby league problem, and for that, we thank you.
We release our episodes weekly, where we preview and review every single game in the National Rugby League, and also deep dive into some of the bigger issues affecting rugby league. If you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you left us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Google. We've left a link in the description below this podcast, and even better if you could share this podcast with a friend or a family member. If you have a question you'd like to ask us, or you really disagree with anything we've said, leave it in the comments section. We'll respond to every question, and if we don't, I'll buy you a beer.
Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and hit the subscribe and notify buttons on your favorite platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
For now, that's it from us. Smell you later.